He didn't raise his voice that night. But somehow, the entire room went quiet anyway. I remember the mirror first. Cracked at the corner, cheap glass from a discount store on 3rd Avenue. The kind that bends your reflection just enough to make you question what's real. My fingers hovered over the bruise near my collarbone, blending concealer 2 shades too light because it was all I could afford. It didn't disappear. It never did. It just softened, like a lie you tell yourself often enough to believe halfway. The clock on the wall read 6:12 p.m. I was already late. Again. The bus wouldn't wait, my manager wouldn't care, and the world would keep spinning whether I showed up or not. That was the thing about being invisible. You could disappear in plain sight, and no one would notice the difference. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fryer oil when I pushed through the back door. Same as always. Same chipped tiles. Same flickering fluorescent light above locker number 12, the one that never quite stayed on. I tied my apron tighter than necessary, sleeves pulled down despite the heat pressing against my skin. 90 degrees outside. Hotter inside. But long sleeves meant fewer questions. Not that anyone asked. "You're late," Mark muttered without looking up from the register. I nodded. Didn't explain. Didn't defend. Invisible girls don't get the luxury of excuses. They just keep moving. Tables filled fast. Office workers. Tourists. A couple arguing in low voices near the window. I carried trays back and forth, refilling coffee, wiping spills, smiling when required. No one looked twice. No one remembered my name. Emily. It stayed in my head because it rarely left anyone else's mouth. Until him. I didn't notice when he walked in. Not at first. Men like him didn't belong in places like this. The kind of tailored suit that didn't wrinkle, shoes too clean for New York sidewalks, presence that didn't ask for space. It took it. Table 14. The corner. Quiet. But the air shifted. Subtle. Like a pressure change before a storm. I felt it before I understood it. "Water," he said when I approached. Just one word. Low. Controlled. I nodded, eyes down like always. But something in my chest tightened. Not fear. Not exactly. Awareness. I turned too quickly, the edge of my tray catching a glass. It tipped. Time slowed. I reached for it, breath catching. Then a hand closed gently around my wrist. Steady. Firm. Warm. The glass didn't fall. Neither did I. My sleeve slipped. Just enough. Just a fraction of an inch. But it was enough. The bruise bloomed under the harsh diner light. Purple fading into yellow. Impossible to miss up close. I froze. His fingers didn't tighten. They didn't hurt. But they didn't let go either. I could feel his gaze before I dared to look up. And when I did, everything stopped. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't soft either. They were precise. Like he was seeing something no one else had ever bothered to notice. My pulse stuttered under his touch. I pulled back instinctively, yanking my sleeve down like it could undo the moment. "It's nothing," I whispered, too fast, too rehearsed. The words tasted hollow the second they left my mouth. He didn't answer. Not right away. He just looked at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Really seen. Not as a waitress. Not as background noise. But as something marked. Something that had a story written into her skin, whether she wanted it there or not. He released my wrist slowly, like the decision mattered. Like everything about this moment mattered. Then he leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving mine. And that's when I understood something I couldn't explain yet. I hadn't been invisible. Not anymore. And somehow, that was more dangerous than anything I'd been hiding from. He did not call me back when I turned away, but I felt it anyway. That invisible thread pulling tight between us as I moved through the rest of my shift like someone walking on thin ice. My hands kept working on autopilot, pouring coffee, clearing plates, smiling at strangers who barely looked up from their phones. But my mind stayed at table 14, replaying the exact moment his fingers had touched my wrist, the way his eyes had locked onto something I had spent months trying to hide. No one had ever noticed before. Not really. People saw what they expected to see. A quiet waitress. A tired girl. Background noise. Not marks. Not stories written into skin. I risked a glance across the room while refilling a water pitcher, just one quick look, but he was already watching me, like he had not moved, like he had been waiting for that exact second. I looked away immediately, heat rushing to my face, pulse quickening for reasons I could not explain. It was not fear, not the kind I was used to anyway. It was something sharper. something that made it harder to breathe. The rest of the staff carried on like nothing had changed. Mark complained about tips. Someone dropped a fork in the kitchen. The world stayed loud and ordinary. But around him, there was a quiet space that did not belong to the diner. It followed him. Or maybe he created it. I did not know. I just knew I kept stepping into it without meaning to. When I brought his check, my hands were steady again. I made sure of that. Careful movements. Controlled breathing. Invisible. That was the goal. That had always been the goal. I placed the bill on the table without meeting his eyes. "Whenever you are ready," I said, the same line I had used 100 times that night. But it did not sound the same. Nothing did. Emily. My name. Soft. Precise. Not guessed. Not read off a tag. Said like it belonged to me. I froze. Slowly, I looked up. He was not looking at the check. He was looking at me. Again. Always me. "It is not nothing," he said. No anger. No raised voice. Just certainty. The kind that did not ask for permission. My throat tightened. I forced a small smile, the kind that never reached my eyes. "It really is," I said, quieter this time, because arguing felt pointless, like trying to convince the ocean not to move. He studied me for a moment longer, and I had the strange, unsettling feeling that he was measuring something I could not see. Then he nodded once, as if he had made a decision that did not require my agreement. "Be careful," he said. The words were simple, but they landed differently. Not advice, not concern, a warning, or maybe a promise. I could not tell. He signed the receipt with a smooth, effortless motion and stood, adjusting his jacket like the room belonged to him. No rush, no hesitation. Power did not hurry. As he walked past me, close enough that I could feel the shift in air, he paused just for a second. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for me. "Next time," he said quietly, "do not hide." Then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than anything else that night. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the empty space where he had been, my heart beating in a rhythm that did not feel like mine anymore. When I finally looked down at the table, the tip he left made my breath catch. Crisp bills. More than I made in 2 days. But it was not the money that made my hands tremble. It was the card underneath. Thick. Black. Minimal. A name embossed in silver. Adrian Volkov. No number written on top. Just printed. Permanent. Like he expected it to be used. Or like he knew it would be. I slipped it into my apron before I could think too much about it. Before I could decide what it meant. Before I could pretend this was just another night. But it was not. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had seen me. And somehow, he had decided that mattered. The card felt heavier than it should have as I walked home that night, tucked deep inside my apron like something alive, something that did not belong in my world but had found its way in anyway. The streets were quieter than usual, the city winding down into that strange in-between hour where everything felt suspended, like the air was holding its breath. I kept my head down, keys already in my hand before I reached my building, the familiar routine settling into my bones. Check the sidewalk. Check the windows. Move quickly. Do not linger. That was how you stayed safe. That was how you stayed invisible. But tonight, something was different. I could feel it in the way my heartbeat refused to settle, in the way my mind kept drifting back to his voice, to the way he had said my name like it mattered, like it had weight. Emily. I unlocked the door and slipped inside, locking it behind me immediately, then again, just to be sure. The apartment greeted me with silence and dim light, the single lamp in the corner casting long shadows across the worn carpet. It should have felt like relief. It always did. But tonight, it felt thin, like something fragile pretending to be solid. I leaned against the door for a second, exhaling slowly, trying to shake the feeling, trying to return to normal. Invisible. Safe. Untouched. My fingers brushed against the card through the fabric of my apron. I hesitated, then pulled it out. Adrian Volkov. The name looked sharper under the lamplight. Deliberate. Permanent. Not something you ignored. Not something you forgot. I set it on the small kitchen table like it might burn me if I held it too long. I should throw it away. That was the logical choice. The safe choice. People like him did not step into places like mine without a reason. And people like me did not get noticed without a cost. I knew that. I had learned that the hard way. I turned away from the table, focusing on small things. Filling a glass of water. Kicking off my shoes. Folding my apron like everything was normal, like tonight had not shifted something I could not name. But my eyes kept drifting back to the card. It sat there quietly, doing nothing, and somehow that made it worse. My phone buzzed suddenly, the sharp sound cutting through the silence. I flinched before I could stop myself. The screen lit up on the counter. A name I did not want to see. I let it ring once, twice. Then I silenced it without answering. The room felt smaller after that. Tighter, like the walls were leaning in just a little closer than before. I moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The street below was mostly empty. A couple walking past. A car idling at the corner. Normal. Ordinary. But I stayed there longer than I needed to, scanning, checking, making sure. My reflection stared back at me faintly in the glass, layered over the city lights. For a second, I saw what he had seen. Not the uniform. Not the tired eyes. Something else. Something marked. I dropped the curtain quickly, turning away like I had caught myself in a lie. This was nothing. That was what I had said. That was what I had always said. But the words felt thinner now. Weaker. Like they were losing their hold. I walked back to the table and picked up the card again, turning it over between my fingers. No message. No instructions. Just a name. Like an open door that had not been there before. I should throw it away. I should forget tonight ever happened. I stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching, my thoughts louder than they had any right to be. Then, slowly, I slipped the card into the drawer beside the sink instead of the trash. Not used. Not gone. Just there. Waiting. And I did not know why that felt like the most dangerous decision I had made all day. Morning came too fast and not fast enough at the same time. The pale light slipping through the thin curtains like it had every other day, ordinary and indifferent. But I woke with that same weight in my chest, like something unfinished had followed me into sleep and refused to leave. For a moment, I stayed still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, trying to convince myself that yesterday had been nothing more than a strange interruption, a moment that would fade if I did not touch it too closely. But my eyes drifted toward the kitchen before I could stop them, toward the drawer. It sat closed, silent, holding more than it should. I exhaled slowly and pushed myself out of bed, forcing routine back into place. Shower. Coffee. Clothes. Normal. Invisible. The word felt weaker this morning, like it did not fit the same way anymore. I dressed carefully, choosing a long-sleeved shirt even though the weather report promised another humid day, 90 degrees by noon. It did not matter. It never did. Some things were not negotiable. By the time I stepped outside, the city was already awake, people moving with purpose, conversations blending into a constant low hum. I walked the same route I always did, head down, pace steady, eyes forward. Do not draw attention. Do not invite questions. But halfway to the bus stop, I felt it again. That shift. Subtle. Unseen. Like being watched without proof. I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just imagination. Still, I checked the reflection in a storefront window as I passed, quick and casual. No one stood out. No one lingered. Everything looked normal. And yet the feeling stayed. The diner was louder than usual when I arrived, the morning rush already in full swing. Mark barely glanced at me as I clocked in, too busy arguing with a supplier on the phone. The familiar chaos wrapped around me. Orders shouted, plates clattering, coffee pouring nonstop. It should have grounded me. It usually did. But today, I moved through it differently, more aware, more careful, like I was waiting for something I could not see yet. Hours passed. Nothing happened. No black suits. No quiet presence in the corner. Just regular customers, regular noise, regular life. I almost started to believe it had been a one-time thing. A moment that meant more to me than it ever had to him. That thought settled heavier than I expected. Around noon, the door chimed softly as someone stepped inside, and I looked up automatically, not expecting anything, just habit. My breath caught anyway. He was not alone this time. Two men followed a step behind him, dressed just as sharply, moving with the same controlled precision, their eyes scanning the room in a way that did not belong in a place like this. But it was him who shifted everything again, just by being there. Adrian Volkov did not look around like a customer. He looked like he was returning to something already decided. His gaze found me almost instantly. Not searching, not guessing, certain. My hand stilled on the coffee pot for half a second too long before I forced myself to move again, to act normal, to pretend that my pulse had not just jumped into my throat. He took the same table. 14. Of course he did. The room did not go silent, but it felt quieter somehow, like something had stepped between the noise and my ears. I told myself to stay away. Let someone else take the table. Keep distance. Stay invisible. But Mark called my name from across the counter, already handing me a fresh pot. 14 needs service, he said without looking. Of course it did. I nodded, because that was what I always did, because saying no was not something I had ever learned to do. Each step toward that table felt measured, deliberate, like crossing a line I could not uncross. When I reached him, I kept my eyes on the table, on the glass, on anything but him. What can I get you? I asked, steady, professional, safe. A pause. Then his voice, exactly as I remembered. You can start by telling me if you slept last night. The question hit differently than it should have. Not casual, not polite, direct, personal. I looked up before I could stop myself, and there it was again, that same unwavering focus, like he had been thinking about the answer before he asked. My throat tightened. I am fine, I said, the automatic response, the practiced one. But even to my own ears, it sounded thinner than it ever had before. He held my gaze for a second longer, then leaned back slightly, like he had confirmed something he already knew. We will see, he said quietly. And somehow, that felt less like a conversation and more like a decision already in motion. Something shifted after he said that, subtle but undeniable, like the air had been claimed and I was just now realizing I was standing inside it. I forced myself to nod, to write down an order he had not even given yet, to keep my hands moving because stillness felt too exposed under his gaze. Coffee, he added after a second, almost as an afterthought, like the words were there only to make the moment look normal. I poured it carefully, aware of every inch between us, every second stretching longer than it should. His eyes followed the motion, not the coffee, not the cup, just me. Always me. I placed it in front of him and stepped back, creating space that did not feel like enough. Anything else? I asked, keeping my voice level, controlled, like I had practiced for years. Yes, he said. Just that. One word. It lingered. I waited, pen still in hand, pretending patience while my pulse picked up again. Stop pretending it does not hurt. The words landed quietly, but they hit harder than anything loud ever could. My fingers tightened around the pen. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I do not know what you mean, I said. The lie automatic, smooth, practiced into something that sounded almost real. Almost. He did not react the way people usually did when they heard something untrue. No frustration. No insistence. Just a slight tilt of his head, like he was adjusting his view of something already understood. You are not good at lying, he said calmly. Not mocking. Not cruel. Just certain. Heat rose to my face again, but this time it was not embarrassment. It was something closer to being exposed, like standing under a light that was too bright for comfort. I glanced around quickly, checking the room, making sure no one was paying attention, but everything looked the same. Conversations continued. Plates moved. Life went on. Only this table felt different. Only this moment. I have work to do, I said, stepping back again, needing distance, needing something solid to hold on to. Of course you do, he replied, and there was something in his tone that made it sound like permission instead of dismissal. I turned before he could say anything else, before I could say something I could not take back, and moved toward the counter, forcing myself back into rhythm, back into motion. But it did not work the same anymore. Every step felt measured against something unseen. Every sound dulled at the edges. I could feel his presence even when I was not looking, like a fixed point in a moving world. Time passed, but it did not feel like it moved forward. It stretched around that table, around him. When I risked another glance, I saw him speaking quietly to one of the men beside him. Just a few words, nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw attention. The man nodded once. That was it. No raised voices. No urgency. Just a simple exchange. And yet something about it made my stomach tighten, like a decision had just been made somewhere I could not reach. I looked away quickly, focusing on refilling sugar containers, on wiping down a clean counter, on anything that made sense. But the feeling stayed. That something had shifted again. That something was already moving. When I passed his table one last time before my break, he did not stop me, did not speak. But as I moved by, close enough to feel that quiet space around him again, His voice reached me anyway. Low. Controlled. Meant only for me. You should not walk home alone tonight. I stopped for half a second, just enough for the words to sink in, just enough for my heart to react before my mind could catch up. Then I kept walking, because stopping would mean acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would mean stepping into something I did not understand. But the words followed me anyway. Not loud, not repeated, just there, sitting in my thoughts like a warning I could not ignore. And for the first time since yesterday, I was not thinking about staying invisible. I was thinking about whether that was even possible anymore. The rest of my shift passed like a slow unraveling, each minute stretching tighter around the warning he left behind until it felt less like a suggestion and more like something already decided. I told myself to ignore it. I had ignored worse. I had learned to move through fear the same way I moved through crowds, quietly, carefully, without drawing attention. But this felt different. Not loud, not chaotic, controlled, precise, like someone had already mapped out the outcome and was just waiting for time to catch up. By the time my shift ended, the sky outside had darkened into that deep blue that comes just before night fully takes over, the air still thick with heat that clung to the skin. I untied my apron slowly, fingers hesitating for no reason I could explain, and glanced toward table 14 one last time. Empty. The cups cleared. The space returned to normal like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Some things did not leave just because the chair was empty. You heading out? Mark asked from behind the counter, already counting the register. I nodded. Yeah. My voice sounded distant, even to me. Be careful out there, he added without looking up. It was a normal thing to say. People said it all the time. But tonight, it landed differently. I stepped outside and the city hit me all at once. Noise, light, movement, everything rushing back in like it had been waiting. Cars passed. People laughed somewhere down the block. A siren echoed in the distance. Normal. Ordinary. I told myself to walk. Just walk. Same route. Same pace. Do not think too much. But my steps slowed without permission, my eyes scanning more than usual, my awareness stretching wider than it ever had before. I turned the corner onto my street and stopped. Just for a second. There was a car parked across from my building that I did not recognize. Black. Clean. Engine off. It could have been nothing. Probably was. But something about it made the air feel tighter. I told myself I was overthinking. That this was what happened when you let someone get into your head. I started walking again, faster this time. Keys already in my hand, every instinct pushing me toward the door. Halfway there, the car door opened. The sound was soft. Controlled. Not rushed. I froze before I could stop myself. A man stepped out, dressed in the same quiet precision I had seen earlier that day. Not Adrian. Someone else. But connected. I knew it without being told. He did not approach too quickly. Did not crowd me. Just enough movement to make his presence clear. Miss Carter, he said, voice respectful, measured, like he had practiced it. Hearing my name again made something inside me tighten. Mr. Volkov asked me to make sure you got home safely. The words settled into the space between us, calm and undeniable. Not a question, not a request, a statement. I stared at him for a moment, trying to understand what that meant, what it changed, what it cost. I did not ask for that. I said quietly, because it felt important to say it, even if it did not matter. The man inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the truth without correcting it. Understood, he replied. Then he stepped back, giving me space, but not leaving. Not going anywhere. Waiting. I looked at the building behind me, at the door that had always meant safety, and realized something I had not expected. I was not sure if I felt safer now or not. I moved past him slowly, unlocking the door, stepping inside, aware of his presence even when I could no longer see him. Inside, everything was the same. The same dim light. The same silence. But it felt different now, like the world outside had followed me in. I locked the door. Then, locked it again. My hand lingered on the knob longer than it should have. Because for the first time, I understood something clearly. I had not asked to be seen. But now that I was not sure I could go back to being invisible, and I was even less sure that he would let me. I did not sleep much that night, not because of fear in the way I used to understand it, but because my mind would not stay quiet, replaying every moment, every word, every look like it was trying to piece together something I still could not fully see. The apartment felt smaller somehow, like the walls had shifted inward just enough to remind me that nothing about my world was as contained as I thought it was. I found myself standing by the window again, just barely pulling the curtain aside, checking the street below like I had done 100 times before, except now I was looking for something different. The black car was still there, parked, silent, not hiding, not leaving, just present. I let the curtain fall back into place slowly, my fingers lingering on the fabric as a strange mix of unease and something else settled into my chest. Not comfort, not exactly, but not the same kind of fear I had grown used to either. Morning came in fragments, broken sleep and restless thoughts, and by the time I got dressed, I moved slower than usual, more aware of every small decision, every movement that used to feel automatic. I opened the drawer without thinking about it, my hand reaching for the card before I could stop myself. Adrian Volkov. The name looked the same, but it felt different now. He was no longer just a stranger who had noticed something he should not have. He was involved, in ways I had not asked for, in ways I did not understand. I closed the drawer again, leaving the card where it was, but the weight of it stayed with me anyway. The walk to work felt shorter that morning, or maybe I just noticed less of it, my thoughts louder than the city around me. When I reached the diner, everything looked the same. Same door, same chipped paint, same flickering light above locker number 12. Normal. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something had changed. Mark was quieter than usual. The other servers kept glancing toward the windows like they were expecting something. Or someone. I followed their gaze without meaning to. The black car was parked across the street. In clear view. Not hiding. Again. A low conversation started behind me, hushed voices trying not to draw attention. They have been there since early morning, someone whispered. Just sitting there. Waiting for what? Another voice asked. No one answered. I felt it then. Not just attention. Presence. Like something had extended into this space, without asking permission. I tied my apron slowly, my hands steadier than I felt, and moved toward the floor like I always did, like routine could still anchor me. But every step felt measured now, like I was walking inside a situation I had not agreed to but could not step out of either. The morning rush came and went, customers filling seats, conversations rising and falling, but underneath it all, there was a tension that did not belong to the diner. It came from outside, from across the street, from him. Around noon, the door chimed again, and I did not need to look to know who it was. The room shifted before I saw him. Adrian walked in alone this time, his presence cutting through the noise without effort, without announcement. His eyes found me immediately, like they always did, like there was no version of this room where he would not see me first. I stood still for half a second, tray in hand, before forcing myself to move, to breathe, to act like this was still normal. But it was not. Nothing about this was normal anymore. He took the same table again. 14. Of course. I approached slowly, aware of every step, every breath, every second stretching between us. You did not need to send someone. I said before I could stop myself, my voice low, controlled, but not as steady as I wanted it to be. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly, like he had been waiting for that exact sentence. You still made it home, he replied. Not defensive, not apologetic, just a fact. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because arguing felt useless, like trying to push against something that did not move. I did not ask for protection. I said anyway, softer this time, because it mattered to say it, even if it did not change anything. He leaned back slightly, studying me the way he always did, like he was reading something beneath the surface instead of listening to the words themselves. You did not ask to be hurt either, he said quietly. The words landed deeper than I expected, cutting through every defense I had built without raising his voice even once. I looked away first. I always did. But this time, it did not feel like I was disappearing. It felt like I was standing at the edge of something I could not step back from. And for the first time, I was not sure if I wanted to. The silence after his words did not feel empty. It felt full, like something had been placed between us that neither of us was going to take back. I stood there longer than I should have, my fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table as if I needed something solid to hold on to. He did not look away. He never did. That was the difference. Everyone else in my life looked away eventually. They lost interest. They missed things. They chose not to see. But him, he stayed. And that made everything harder to ignore. You do not get to decide that, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended, but steady enough to carry. It was the first real pushback I had given him. The first time I had drawn something that resembled a line. His expression did not change, but there was a shift in his posture, subtle, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. He was listening now, not just observing. Listening. You are right, he said after a second. The agreement caught me off guard. I had expected resistance. Control. Something heavier. But not that. I do not decide what happened, he continued, his voice low, measured, like every word had been chosen before it was spoken. I decide what happens next. The words settled differently than anything he had said before. Not forceful, not threatening, just inevitable. I felt my breath catch for a moment, like my body understood something my mind was still trying to process. And what exactly does that mean? I asked, because I needed to hear it, needed to define it before it defined me. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the distance without touching it, his presence filling the space in a way that made everything else feel further away. It means, he said, that the part of your life where you pretend this is normal ends here. My chest tightened, not because the words were loud, but because they were true in a way I had spent a long time avoiding. I opened my mouth to respond, to deny it, to push back again, but the words did not come. Because what would I even say? That I was fine, that everything was under control, that I had chosen this version of my life. None of it would hold under his gaze. None of it ever did. A glass shattered somewhere behind me, the sharp sound breaking the moment, pulling the diner back into focus. Voices rose. Someone apologized. Life continued. But when I looked back at him, nothing had changed. Not for him. Not for us. You cannot just walk into someone's life and decide things for them, I said, softer now, because the fight in me felt different. Not gone, but shifting. No, he agreed again, almost calmly. I cannot. A pause. Then, quieter, more deliberate. But I can make sure the people who hurt you do not get another chance. The words landed heavier than anything else he had said. Not loud, not detailed, but clear enough that my mind filled in the space around them without needing explanation. I felt something inside me pull in two directions at once. One part wanting to step back, to reject everything he was offering, everything he represented. And another part, the part one had tried to ignore for too long, felt something close to relief. That scared me more than anything else. I took a step back, needing space again, needing to breathe without him so close, without his certainty pressing in from all sides. I do not need saving, I said, the words coming out sharper than I expected, like they had been waiting. He studied me for a moment, really studied me, like he was weighing that statement against everything else he had already seen. Then he nodded once. No, he said quietly. You need to stop surviving and start living. The simplicity of it hit harder than any argument could have. I did not respond. I could not, because something in me recognized the truth in that too, even if I did not want to admit it out loud. The distance between us felt different now. Not safer, not more dangerous, just real. Like whatever this was, it was no longer something I could pretend was accidental. As I turned to leave the table, to return to the noise and movement that suddenly felt like a different world, his voice followed me one last time. Not stopping me, not calling me back, just there. Emily, he said, and I paused despite myself, just for a second. You do not have to do this alone anymore. I did not turn around. I did not answer. But as I walked away, the words stayed with me, settling somewhere deeper than I wanted them to. Because for the first time in a long time, I was starting to believe him. The rest of the day passed, but it did not feel like time moving forward. It felt like something settling into place, piece by piece, until I could no longer pretend I was standing outside of it. I moved through my shift the same way I always had, trays balanced, orders memorized, smiles given when required, but everything felt sharper now, more defined, like the world had adjusted its focus, and I was seeing it clearly for the first time whether I wanted to or not. I did not look at him again after that. Not directly, but I felt him there, constant, unmoving, like a line drawn across the room that I could not cross back over. When my shift finally ended, the sky had already turned that deep evening gray, the kind that blurred the edges of everything. I untied my apron slowly, folding it with more care than necessary, as if delaying the moment I would have to step outside, and decide what any of this meant. "You okay?" Mark asked, glancing up briefly. I nodded automatically. "Yeah." The word came out easier than it should have. Habit was hard to break. I stepped outside and the air felt cooler than it had all day, a slight breeze cutting through the heat that had lingered since morning. The street looked the same. Cars passed. People walked by. Nothing out of place. And yet, I did not move right away. I stood there for a second, keys in my hand, listening to the quiet hum beneath the noise, the part of the city that most people never noticed. Then I saw it. The black car was still there, parked, waiting, not hidden, not pretending to be anything else. I should have felt trapped. I should have felt like something had been taken from me without permission. But standing there, looking at it, I realized something unexpected. I did not feel smaller. I felt different, like the space around me had changed shape. The door behind me opened softly, and I did not need to turn to know it was him. I could feel it in the way the air shifted, in the way everything else seemed to step back just enough to make room. "You are thinking too much," Adrian said, his voice calm, steady, like he had been standing there longer than I realized. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze without lowering mine this time. That alone felt like a decision. "You are doing too much," I replied, the words coming out clearer than I expected. Not defensive, not afraid, just honest. Something flickered in his expression, brief but real, like he had not expected that answer, but accepted it anyway. "Perhaps," he said. No denial, no correction, just acknowledgement. I took a step forward, closing part of the distance between us, not because I had to, but because I chose to. That felt important. "You cannot control everything," I added, quieter now, because the truth of it mattered more than the volume. He studied me for a moment, really studied me, like he was adjusting something in his understanding rather than rejecting what I said. Then he nodded once. "No," he agreed, "but I can control what I allow near you." The words were not a command, not a claim, but they carried weight anyway, settling into the space between us like something solid. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just a fraction, not because everything was resolved, but because something had shifted. This was no longer just him deciding. I was part of it now, whether I wanted to be or not. I glanced at the car, then back at him. "And what if I do not want that?" I asked, because I needed to hear the answer, needed to know where the line really was. He did not hesitate. "Then I adjust," he said simply. "No anger, no pressure, just certainty. But I do not disappear." The honesty in that hit harder than anything else could have. No illusions, no promises he could not keep, just truth. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him, because I understood something in that moment that I had been avoiding since the beginning. This was not about being saved. It was not about being owned. It was about being seen and deciding what to do with that. I turned toward my building, keys already in my hand, but I paused before unlocking the door, looking back at him one last time. "I am not invisible," I said, not as a question, not as a doubt, but as something I was finally allowing myself to say out loud. Adrian's gaze did not waver. "No," he replied quietly. "You never were." I held his eyes for 1 second longer, then nodded once, small but certain, before stepping inside. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but this time, it did not feel like an escape. It felt like a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I was not trying to disappear. I was deciding who I wanted to be seen by.